This little guy, Henri Lefebvre, for me was a very important individual. Probably many architects may know of Henri Lefebvre. He was also part of the Situationist movement. But this little phrase that I've got up there has pretty much driven my work once I left the performing arts in 2004 and moved into informing the visual art work that I'm doing with theater and opera that I did for about 30 years with this particular phrase. I wanted to start today with a little story that happened to me when I was running a native theater school up in Northern Ontario. And for me, this story is, if you like, a little bit about everything that I love and everything that I think humanity is about. There was a gentleman named Jim Buller. He was a Bush Cree, and he wanted his students to experience theater. And I had been in Europe, and I had been working with Grotowski, who is a great physical theater artist from Poland, and I had been working with Jacques Lecoq in his theater, and worked a lot and was very friendly with Ellen Stewart at La Mama in New York, as well as when she helped me get together in La Mama de Paris. And so I started putting together a course, and we found this great farm up near Georgian Bay, and we started teaching everyone all these different ideas, inclusive of, Indian dance or native languages. Every kid that was there was between the ages of 18 and 21. Most of them, the girls were hookers, the guys were drug addicts and or pimps. They had been drinking gasoline, whatever. You name the worst thing possible, they had all done it. And they had all been accumulated here in this little farm to do theater, whatever that might be at the end of 2 months of work. That summer, what was interesting, it went very, very well. It was a fantastic. We staged the work that was outside and inside and used cars, and we brought in the local farmers, and they participated and everything like that. But one night, the bad news came that Jim Buller passed away. And at that particular evening, we had a great deal of elders up who we were putting together the day, and they would always bless the day and work with the kids. And that evening, they told us, and there was a great deal of weeping. It was very tragic. He was one of the great men I've ever met. And we decided that we would do a sweat. I don't know if you've ever done a sweat, but it's basically a native sauna. And so we built the lodge, and we built 3 of them because there were around 20 of us. And each elder took over one, and it's very, very hot. You basically take off all your clothes and wrap yourself up, and you crawl inside, and there's a great deal of intense drumming and singing inside this. So it's almost hallucinogenic because you're hot, there's a singing, and then everyone is weeping and crying about Jim Buller. And so this all happened, and I engaged in it, and being the white guy, I was there. And we got out, and as we got out, we were steaming. It was a beautiful image, actually. It was a cool evening, and if you've ever taken a sauna and run into a lake, your body leaves this trail behind you. And so you had this 20 people leaving these trails in the moonlight, and suddenly, someone pointed, and the northern lights started appearing. And everyone fell, almost, just fell to the ground, and I didn't know what the hell was going on. And then finally they said, it means that the spirits had come down to pick up the soul of Jim and take him back up to the great Manitou, or to the great spirit. In 1909, something very special happened to begin the 20th century. This guy here on your left, Marinetti, he began the Futurists. Now, it's a very controversial movement, but what's interesting about the Futurist movement is that it was cross-disciplinary. You name it, they did it. The Italians were on the verge of something very, very important. Futurism also moved into Moscow, it moved into Europe, and it began what was going to be the upsetting of what we understood as perspective prior to everything. And the most important thing is that the manifesto that he wrote was on the front page of Le Figaro. It never happened before. An artistic manifesto was written. For those of you who have ever been to Torino, this is the Trucco's Fiat plant that had a driving course up on top. So this was built in 1923. The futurists went into Mussolini, and the controversy was that Marinetti believed in violence. He believed in violence, that the only way to upheave and change things was through violence, but not the violence that Mussolini was talking about, though Mussolini absorbed him into all of that. That's another slice of architecture. They did performance art. They wrote plays. They did music. They did everything that you can imagine, fashion. One of the other most important things happened in New York City. Actually, it's the 100th anniversary. It's the Armory Show that happened. At the Armory Show, maybe some of you know this chap here. The Europeans invaded New York at that point. Duchamp came over, Picabia came over, and suddenly what Americans understood as painting or art suddenly got, again, there was an upheaval. People didn't know what was going on. There was a guy who came with a chair with a bicycle wheel on it that you could spin. You could actually touch the artwork. You could participate in it. And then he took a urinal. He found a urinal, and he put it on a plinth, and he signed it, Mutt. And that became one of the foremost works of art to begin the 20th century. What happened? People got together and were tired of everybody doing the same thing. Fine art was ruling the world. Painters were ruling the world. Sculptors were ruling the world. Other people who had creative ideas wanted to change that. After the Futurists came these guys, the Dadaists. This was around 1916. This was another great group. This is Hugo Ball. I actually did this performance once. And this is Tristan Tzara. He was the founder, along with a numerous group of people in Switzerland at the Cabaret Voltaire. That, again, was a movement that spread all over. In fact, it spread to Montreal. There was a little bit of Dadaism going on in New York City, but not that much. The next thing that happened, the Russians, they had a revolution. Everything got upset again. The constructivists came in. At that point, you had Tatlin and his amazing tower that really never got built, but still is an influence all over the world. It was meant to be higher than the Eiffel Tower. Up on top was the constructivist idea of scenography. You had Myra Holt, who was changing the whole idea of theater, that the theater doors were open and the workers could come in and watch theater and participate, much like when Shakespeare had the Globe. The audience would come in and they would boo and hoot and tell you what they liked or they didn't like. And that's, again, just a little bit of a design. I'm just going through this really quickly. The next step was a surrealism revolution that happened in art, that followed. After that, you had the German expressionists that came in. Hans Richter. You had people like Karl Dreyer. All these people making films. If you remember The Vampire or Nosferatu, this is all German expressionism. Then you had Bauhaus. What was going on in the 20th century that was exciting is that everything was being turned upside down. And America was being influenced. North America, just the point. There is more to North America and the Western Hemisphere than the United States of America. The next thing we had was the Situationists, where suddenly the theater art was taken outside, and what you wanted to look at was everything that was not art. That an alleyway was art, that a building was art, that the spectacle of everyday life was art in itself. Then we had public participation starting to actively engage in the human body. Julian Beck and Judith Malina, they had a company called the Living Theater. This was during the 60s, the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, as tragic as it was the most influential catalyst in American history for everything that occurred. Everything that came out of that war in the sense of protest, in the sense of art, in the sense of music, changed everything in the United States, North America, Europe, everyone. He began to do things, naked bodies on the stage, body piles. The audience, I went to the performance at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and they did Paradise Now. And suddenly everyone was taking off their clothes and piling onto the stage. Then we had Alan Kaprow, the kind of mastermind behind the happenings. Here you've got a performance work of audience participation, where it's called Women Licking Jam Off a Volkswagen. Okay? And up here you have boxes of fluid. This was called fluids. They were just shells of fluid being piled upon one another to build a building. Then there was this guy, Joseph Beuys, who began to look at the engagement of art as something to look at, outside of performance, but putting himself in a room with an animal, and then befriending that animal over a period of time. And this work actually was called I Like America and America Likes Me. Then we had a couple guys. Jeremy Deller came along. He was a Turner Prize winner, but he also did the Battle of Orgiev. I can't remember. It's a miners' battle. It's interesting to look at the video. He staged the entire protest. It's like, you know, the Civil War guys go down to Gettysburg and they reenact. So suddenly reenactment began to influence artists. Like, well, if they can reenact big glorified history events, why don't we reenact the storming of the Winter Palace? And that's what the Russians did. And I think it was 1921. That was the first of big masses of people participating together and moving into an artwork. This is Thomas Hirshhorn. This is the Gramsci project that actually he just did in Bronx. It wasn't that successful, but he paid everyone better wages to build his artwork than they were getting anywhere else in the Bronx. And it was dedicated to the leftist thinker, the Italian leftist thinker. Then, of course, there's Burning Man. That's when everyone goes and they party hard and they build these amazing things like you're seeing on the screen. This is one of my works. This is where I look at taking sculpture and letting that being the driving force, and people participate in creating different things with it. This is a lighting scheme they can develop for 15 seconds long. This is a work I did in New York. I mentioned it to a few people. This particular work here, we looked at the history of quarantine on Roosevelt Island. We had about 100 people working with us. And each tent was a particular installation that they created out of a story that they found. This is a work that we did with the Aboriginals based on their stories at the turn of the century prior to fishing pollution in the Gulf of Carpentaria. And this is a work that we're working on now called The Scarecrows, which is a ceremonial work around the feelings of nature and sculpture together. I'm throwing all this at you because I just wanted to say that a great deal of discussion over the last couple of days has been how we are being taken by digital work. And I do believe that when people get together and actually have a force and work together, they can do something that is above and beyond the digitalization of their lives, because fundamentally, we're still human. And that little thing inside of us makes us go faster and do things more interesting. My son is doing his doctorate at the Max Planck Institute. He's doing it, part of it is on the touch sensitivity and recognition of robots and developing their brains or programming their brains. He's a computational neuroscience scientist. And I asked him one day, I said, are we more like machines today, or were we more like machines before? And he thought about that, and then he said, you've got to throw the whole idea of evolution out the window. I know that can be a little bit weird, but throw it out the window for a minute. That's what he said, and I went, okay, I can deal with that. He said, now imagine that we were first machines, that we were ignorant, that we didn't know anything. He said, I build robots. They're structures, they're shells, they're containers. They don't know anything. But through time, they begin to learn things. They begin to build within themselves a certain individuality. So he said, you know, we're soft machines, stupid, with a great deal of potential, with the potential to become human and find individuality. And that is what we've been trying to do while building a world, learning and failing and refining our flawed yet functional shell of thought. Okay? So this is a tender interval. This is something that Nabokov said that I've always loved. Maybe the only thing that hints at a sense of time is rhythm. Not the recurrent beats of the rhythm, but the gap between the two such beats. The gray gap between black beats, the tender interval. So if we're made up of ones and zeros and dots and atoms, it means there's a lot of space in between there if we get closer and closer and closer. And if there is, what is it in your daily life that you can find your doppelganger, your double? I often do this. I stand still and I think about myself. And then I move right here. And I turn and I ask myself, where are you going? Try that sometime. Try to extricate yourself from yourself and talk to yourself. Actually, don't talk to yourself. Just ask yourself 1 or 2 questions. And then maybe you'll begin to understand that there is the machine that is being driven through digitalization, through everyone walking around like this today, and that little thing is telling everyone where to go, right? Put it away. Don't throw it. I use them all the time. And you're developing ecosystems. You've got Apple fighting Android and Android fighting, or everyone's almost trying to kill BlackBerry. And then you know what? Something else is going to happen. And Apple's going to be in the same spot they were 20 years ago, and everything's going to change, because that's all business. But those are only tools, and we have to remember they're only tools. They're not our brains. They're not our feelings. They're not our thoughts, and they're not our humanity. They can only help us achieve things a little faster than we used to. A couple things that are classical are we being played as an instrument of the gods? And who are the gods? Again, here and here. Look, are you being played today? Ask yourself that. We're all intelligent beings. Especially here, I was like almost scared shitless when I realized these are the people I have to speak in front of tomorrow. I didn't know what was going to happen. And then the other question that's really important is behavior. A lot of people touched upon this. It's really important about this machine thing that I was talking about, is that machines can be controlled. Their behavior can be controlled. It can be directed. It can be told what to do. At one point, behavior takes over intelligence. An actor does that. A really good actor, they allow themselves to be taken away by that other thing they've been created to do. They become a character. In our sense, we would become caricatures of ourselves. One driven, one going, where am I going? Where am I going? Then you get into the Sartrean existential thing of like bad faith, like you wake up and go, this is not my beautiful wife, this is not my beautiful house, and you start to run, and you don't know where you're going because you've been directionless all your life. So, when you get a moment, because we don't have time now, but consider a line. Take a piece of paper and draw one continuous line. And as you're drawing that line, understand that that line is connected by dots and has little atoms. And see if you can outline your life. Just think about it. It's a meditative thing. Start the line. It can squiggle. It can circle. It can do whatever you want. But let it go all over the place until you get to the point where you are right now. And to see if you can actually encapsulate your life in one movement, one stroke. Just try that as an exercise. We don't have time to do that. So I'm going to end with this. I'm going to end with a great quote by Protagoras, which is, man is the measure of all things. A statement generally interpreted to mean that there are not objective, absolute standards that exist external to human beings. Instead, all standards by which things might be measured, including our values, must come from within human beings and are dependent upon our circumstances and situations. And I could just want to add one thing, and our ability to understand where we're going and where we're not going. Thank you very much.